Good evening. Good evening. Welcome all. Thank you so much for being here. It's 6:30. You're here in the Keough school where no meeting starts on time. So we want to make an exception and start on time. My name is Clemens Sedmak, and I'm teaching social ethics here at the Keough school. And I'm the director of the Nanovic Institute for European Studies. And as many of you know, the Nanovic Institute is very committed to the Ukrainian cause. And we have many friends in Ukraine. And the Ukrainian Catholic University is one of our stellar partners. So I was very grateful and felt honored that I was asked to moderate this student panel tonight. What we are having here is a collaboration of, and there's so many, I have to read that, a collaboration between Notre Dame International Senior Fellows for Internationalization. Hey, Judy, I mean, some acronym, right? So Notre Dame International Senior Fellows for Internationalization, thank you. Ukrainian Society, thank you. And then obviously the Klau Institute for Civil and Human Rights, and they put up the food out there. Kevin, is there some food left? Should I make another announcement or rather say? Not much food left, so don't get up and get more food because there's not more left. And the idea behind the panel was to welcome our special guests this semester in a special way. As you all know, Archbishop Boris Gutsiak, the highest ranked Ukrainian Catholic prelate here in the United States, who was rector and still is president of the Ukrainian Catholic University, was our commencement speaker in May. And our university president, John Jenkins, made an agreement with Archbishop Boris that Notre Dame would support the Ukrainian Catholic University in a special way through a package. And that package also includes that students will be with us for a semester. And so we are very blessed and privileged that we have 7 undergrad students and 3 graduate students from the Ukrainian Catholic University with us this semester. And this is very special because they have deep insights in what for most of us is a phenomenon out there far away. I have to say it is quite close. I'm from Austria, it's quite close to us. Lviv is 4 car hours away from Vienna. So in this sense, the war is very real and very close. We see how the whole security infrastructure in Europe is disrupted, where we see global ripple effects of the war. So it is a privilege to have people with us who do not have a third-person perspective of the war, but a first-person and second-person perspective. In epistemology, we sometimes distinguish between knowledge by acquaintance and knowledge by description. Many of us have knowledge by description of the war. We hear about it, we read about it. And we have friends and colleagues among us who have knowledge by acquaintance of the war in different ways and on different levels. And the point of this panel tonight is to share your experiences, dear friends, and then to engage in a respectful dialogue. I was asked by one of the colleagues here, what if there are not enough questions? There will be questions. And as you have seen from the program, the panel in theory can be until 8 o'clock. So we set aside 90 minutes. But if we see that people get tired, and if we see that the questions are kind of, ebbing off, we will say we call it a day and there's no pressure whatsoever. So this should be an informal, welcoming atmosphere where we are very grateful to have Ola with us, who will talk about the war and a personal story about being displaced. We have Olenka with us, who will talk about home, family, and leaving Ukraine and a feeling of guilt. We have another Ola with us to my far left, who will talk about the education process in wartime and its importance, and the volunteering in the university. We have Bohdana next to my right, who will talk about the volunteer work with internet displaced persons. And we have Christina to my far right, who will talk about war and resilience. And if I may just end my introduction on this note, resilience, it is one of the important concepts and challenges in a situation like this to be resilient. Tara Stopko, the Senior Vice Rector of the Ukrainian Catholic University, whom we are blessed to have with us since January, is also interested in a research project, actually a research program on resilience and recovery. We organized a summer school for Ukrainian students in Dubrovnik on the topic of resilience and recovery. And so the topic will continue to be with us. And we are just thinking about the Ukrainian Catholic University as a resilient university. And a resilient university is based on inner social cohesion, is based on adaptability, is based on wide social networks and a clear sense of values. And not only the university as an institution, but all the individual students here show this resilience with a sense of adaptability, a sense of clear values, and a sense of networks. And this evening may help you and all of us to enlarge your networks and the support that you may feel. With all that, thank you so much for being here. Each of the panelists will speak for about 5 minutes. We're not fascists. It could be between 4 and 7, right? And we will start with Ola, move on to Olenka, Ola, Bohdana, and Christina. Ola, thank you so much. Floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay. Hello to all of you. My name is Ola. I'm 19. I'm a junior in a Ukrainian Catholic University, majoring in political science. Also, I'm so glad to all of you for coming, and I'm glad we have this conversation. The vast majority of titles of news nowadays are kind of like the situation in Ukraine. But what is happening in Ukraine is a full-scale war, which leads to the physical demolition of Ukrainian cities and their citizens, and concerns the whole world. The situation in Ukraine is the following. Thousands of killed peaceful civilians, damaged critical infrastructure, humanitarian crisis in Ukraine cities, and refugee crisis in Europe make our new reality. The threat of nuclear war is no longer an impossible danger, but something which should create our new reality, since after Russia has shown it by occupying atomic power plants, or for instance, the latest speech of Vladimir Putin. Since the last week, a whole world has been viewing photos of what Russian peace has done to Izium and Balaklia in the Kharkiv region. The corpse of people scattered of the bombed streets, all the Russian soldiers left. Around 4 million people have fled to the bordering countries, and 4.5 million are displaced within Ukraine. And it is the second time I have been displaced because of the Russian aggression. The first occurred in 2014, when Russia occupied Donbas, the eastern part of Ukraine. My home city was under the full Russian authority. Now Russia is sending troops from my home city to Ukraine. Imagine a 10-year-old girl who's attending school, spends her free time with friends and family, doing fencing classes, and dream of becoming a world champion one day. All these events took place in Luhansk, a city in the east part of Ukraine that used to be a flourishing industrial place, producing top athletes and Olympians. But little did she know that in 2014, her life would change forever, as Luhansk was transformed into a place that many people, me including, fled to the war. Thus, even though I moved from where being still a child, the situation left an incredible mark on my conscience. In 2014, I moved to Keough, the capital of Ukraine, which became my second home. The city considerably contributed to the following chapter in my story. As it is known, Keough is a multi-million strong city, which means that despite the city bringing up a significant number of challenges, it brings resilience to you. This trait is especially vital because it allows to effectively overcome crisis, which is fundamental to leadership and ministry. For instance, since the beginning of the full-scale invasion caused by Russia, and despite the high stress level, I've started volunteering in a city council of Chernivtsi, helping communicating with international partners regarding the logistic of humanitarian aid for the army and internally displaced persons. Staying in a relatively safe Western Ukrainian city, crossing the Polish border, and then flying to Keough, from there is a blessing compared to what experience those who are now in occupied Mariupol, Kherson, Donbas, and Crimea regions, and those who have lost their lives and families. Now, as all of Ukrainians, we are fighting to have a right of citizenship in our country, live peacefully on our land, and we have to fight for survival instead of direct our efforts to the flourishment and development. 8 years has passed since the annexation of Crimea and occupation of Donbas. And what we should have learned from now is that such regimes of dictatorship required no compromises in terms of reaction to its action. The worst thing that could happen to the international community is getting used to hearing about the war news. And after the first shock has passed, to shift our focus from it and make it one more line in your daily news agenda. We should have learned that silence, compromise, and delayed action results in what has happened in Ukraine today. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura.
Hi, I hope you can hear me well. My name is Olenka, and in my home university in Keough, I'm a senior in cultural studies, and here I study anthropology, religious studies, art history, and art study. So a lot of stuff. Before I start, I only wanted to emphasize that we are here to share our stories, which are not, however, exhaustive and full. They don't encompass all of the experience of every Ukrainian. So we're just sharing what we've been through during the first few months of war and where it leaves us now. And the last thing that we need you is to feel sorry for us, because this panel intends to bring us closer to you and give you a glimpse into our reality. So sorrow is not the goal of this discussion. And I would just want to reflect on a few things that this war experience and situation not necessarily gave to me, but probably took from me and made me feel. So the first thing was the feeling of fear, and then a feeling of home, and a feeling of guilt. Morning of the 21st of February paralyzed everyone in fear, and the crossing of border with my family on the 25th of February was even scarier and did leave me with the fear of crowd and a few scars after the 15-hour long walk in the freezing cold. And every next day until my mom, my brother, and my dog left Ukraine, it was on the 1st of March, fear was only growing. The fear of uncertainty and unknown, as we knew that at some point we will have to leave the place that already barely felt like home. And I really didn't want to leave, as I was convinced that I will be of more use in Ukraine at home. And also I didn't want to leave my dad. However, the decision was made when my brother and I, we were testing out the service for mobile phones, which would work if there was no mobile service. And he texted me a test text, and it said, "I'm scared." And we left, and I figured out that how much was needed was my family helping them on our week-long journey from Ukraine to Poland and to Czech Republic to Germany, from Germany to France, and from France to Spain, where my godmother lived. So we crossed the border and traveled for 1 week. What was surprising is that fear and anxiety didn't leave us when we crossed the border and left Ukraine. It hit us much more, and especially me, because as we were living in my godmother's place in the little quiet Spanish village, the absence of control of situation, not being able to understand what's going on, when, how, was really scary, and I didn't know whether my all loved ones were safe. And at the moments, it really felt unbearable. The fear of loss and loneliness too were present. And even though I was with my mom and with my brother, we all had different viewpoints on the situations, but this fear was common. And this fear, along with anxiety, overpowered most of the feelings, but also devoured the sense of home. Home is a feeling connected to the specific place, doesn't really feel like it exists anymore. It remained on the 23rd of February and all the days and months and years prior. So I taught myself to link the sense of home to specific people, especially my close friends and family, and specifically that happened to be my mom and my brother, who were with me for around 4 months in Spain. This experience unfortunately distanced me from my dad, because men are not allowed to leave Ukraine. While in Spain, it was essential to find some familiar people, because, well, humans tend to find home and look for it and find comfort. So every Sunday we were on these demonstrations where Ukrainians were trying to spread awareness about Ukraine and the war. And it was happening in Tarragona. And however, after like two of those demonstrations, I realized that these little rituals that were like an hour long and started and ended with Ukrainian anthem, they were mostly for people. And every Sunday there were more people coming, but with every Sunday there were more dissociated faces of women and children. And because I understood that they were evacuated from central Ukraine or the eastern part of Ukraine, if they were lucky enough. And those there were mostly kids and women, and this trace of terror and pain and grief was reflected in their eyes and women's faces. And the last thing that is really, really big and still sort of haunts me is the feeling of guilt. It's a really bitter feeling, and it started bothering me from the first day of war, because instead of volunteering and helping students in the Keough or helping my mom, helping my mom sorting out medicine in the hospital, I was at home taking care of my brother, my dog, and at some points it was unbearable because I felt like I was not doing enough. And I felt really guilty for fleeing, for leaving Ukraine and not staying against to volunteer. But I realized that my loved ones needed me around much more because they didn't really know English. So I sort of helped them to do and all this journey from Ukraine all over the Europe and to Spain. This feeling of guilt along with gratitude is a really overwhelming mix, and I still carry it in my chest. And as Oля said, millions have fled the country, disrupting their family ties and living into a unknown future. But everyone has different stories. So if you will have any more questions specifically about this topic, about the life uh, abroad when there's war going on in Ukraine, there's also Darina. She can answer your questions as well because she too was in Spain. But she obviously has different experience. This year it did start horrifyingly and shook every Ukrainian soul and changed the trajectories of millions of lives. And we're one of those million. We are one of those millions, and I too am just a drop in the ocean who got to be lucky enough and ended up firstly in summer school in Croatia, and now I'm here, and I am beyond grateful for being here. But every day I do ask myself why it's me who's here and not someone else who probably deserves it much more. But even though neither feeling of fear nor guilt nor the sense of absence of home disappeared, and the feeling of home still leaves for me and other people, not the specific place, I learned to accept all of those feelings as a part of experience I lived through. I do still feel guilty and as if I'm not doing enough, but I'm very happy that I was there for my family and that I'm here right now as well. Um, Perhaps that was and still is my role in this event. And other panelists will share more stories about their experience specifically in Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. First, thank you all for coming to our discussion panel. My name is Oля. I'm from the west of Ukraine. West of Ukraine is the place where, fortunately, there are no active military actions and people are more or less safe there. Now I'm going to talk about the studying process in Ukraine and students' life in wartime. This is an important topic to raise because many of you asked which projects and volunteering we were engaged in where the war started, what we did, how we felt, and whether we had classes at a university. And this is a huge part of our everyday life. We study and work for our victory, and I want to share this with you. The educational process at universities resumed 2 weeks after the war had started. It was a time when many students were in unsafe places, had mental issues, or were engaged in active volunteering. So Obviously, classes were not of the first place of importance for them. But what is valuable, our university suggested having practical-oriented studying that will help us to be useful in wartime and during the rebuilding of Ukraine. For example, I'm a political science student, and in one of our classes, we learned how to write analytical articles for the big Western media about the situation in Ukraine. I personally was interviewed by two US TV channels and spoke about my feelings as a student. I believe it was necessary because people usually read facts about what just happened in Ukraine, but in my interviews, I show my true emotions and feelings. What is more important is that our university was not just an educational institution. It became a place of proactive students who united and helped refugees, soldiers, collected money, needed equipment and stuff. Unfortunately, I can't tell you about all organization and activities because hundreds of them are within just one university. But what about my personal experience? I was working as the head of the media department in my dormitory, and our duties basically were to show the life of our dorm on social media. And I remember that on the first day of war, I said to my team, guys, let's stop our activities because they are not relevant because of war. But then some of the university staff called me and said that it would be great to collect videos within student stories of how and why they volunteer and help to fight the enemy, and then to share these videos abroad. Frankly speaking, first I wanted to give up because it took effort, time, and I was exhausted as many other students, but I agreed to do this. And now I'm very glad I did this because I was so inspired by the stories of my peers we collected. I realized that with such proactive young people, Ukraine would have a bright and prosperous future. And it also motivated me to continue the activities that we did before the war in my dorm. Every day, we reminded students on our social media of dorm that even if they are abroad, they have their second home. It's their dorm, and it misses them all so much and wait for them back. Many students said thank you for keeping them updated because we posted photos and videos of events, their rooms, and the everyday life of their dorm in new conditions. I can understand them very well now when I'm far away from my home university. I like to see their pictures of how they started their academic year and enjoy being together in a student community in new conditions. So the point is that every work is essential and valuable during the war. We need to continue working in a sphere we are the best and not give up as I wanted to do it on the first day of war. Now we all are here at Notre Dame in our exchange program. We study hard because we know that Ukraine will need professionals and educated people to rebuild Ukraine. We share the information about horrible Russian crimes with you because we believe that you are the future of your country and you will be future policy making and voters. That's what we can do as students for our victory. So continue to support Ukraine and thank you all.
Hi all, my name is Bogdana and I am a sophomore originally from Rivne, a city in the west of the country. When the full-scale invasion just started, I was still living in an UKU dorm and volunteering there. My parents tried to force me to leave the country, especially after talk about nuclear bombing started. But ultimately, since I was already 19 at the time, they couldn't do anything. They perks of freedom, you know? They didn't want me to come home to Rivne either, because our city is much closer to Belarus, a known ally to Russia, and across the street from our house is a chemical factory, which were also targeted by missiles at the time. I did eventually go home after 2 months, disregarding my mom's pleas to stay in a safer Lviv, since it's easier to get to Poland from there. In a dark irony, 2 oil storage facilities 4 and 7 miles away from my house were hit by missiles literally the next day after me coming home. That was my first encounter with actual bombings. I learned that from a distance, you feel the vibration of the explosions go through your body more than you can hear the sound itself. The terrifyingly bright oil fires were burning the whole night, and the smoke could be seen for a couple more days. A week after that, when my parents went to visit my uncle, who just came from the front line to a short vacation, 6 missiles were launched into the chemical factory across the street. Thankfully, they were intercepted by an aerial defense system. But what I actually heard in present reality were 6 explosions directly above my house. At the time, 4 of our relatives from Keough were also living with us. They escaped the battle for the city and the bombings there. So a new sound of explosions made it really hard for them to stay calm and collected. I tried to help them relax, but they refused to leave the house's basement for 3 hours after we heard the explosions at the sky. Me, my parents, and our relatives all temporarily or forever lost our jobs at the time. My father and his colleagues have converted their office into a storage for humanitarian aid and founded a charity organization that helps mothers with children, especially those who are single caretakers or need special care. So all of us were volunteering there. We have gathered resources from our friends abroad, ourselves, and other Ukrainians. Diapers, baby formula, toys, clothes. You often don't really think about how much is really needed to raise a child in a normal condition. Most of the people we helped were internally displaced people who escaped from Russian occupation and didn't really get a chance to take any of their things with them. Most of them, just like us and millions other Ukrainians, didn't have any active income at the time either. So everybody tried to help as much as they could. Working with children was especially hard. And surprisingly, I think it was much harder to be with children who tried putting on a brave face instead of crying or being afraid. Because when the siren notified us of a threat of a missile strike, a collective shudder always took over the room, and a surge of adrenaline to quickly find shelter kicked in. I once in a bomb shelter, when the sirens came on for like the third, maybe fourth time a day, I had a girl took me into a corner in the room and whispered to me quietly so nobody else hears, "Can we please stay an extra 15 minutes after the threat is over in the shelter, just in case Russians launch another bomb?" She was 9, and a week after all, we organized her birthday party in a zoo, and she really, really tried to be happy and not show her tears to her mother. A lot of the people we helped had lost their homes and possessions and didn't have enough resources to seek refuge abroad. Some were single parents, others' husbands were soldiers, some dads simply didn't make it through the filtration camps that Russians organized on the evacuation ways from Mariupol and other cities. Families had to rely on other regular Ukrainians who provided them with housing, food, and they had to try to find a job in a market where every other lost theirs. We still were very lucky enough to receive resources from our friends abroad and to work with Polish and Slovakian hospitals to help transport sick children, especially cancer patients and those who needed surgeries or prosthetics, and help them receive the medical care they needed for free. Expanding our connections, we inevitably also starting directly helping the Ukrainian army. Since my uncle was on the front lines in Kharkiv, we worked with him to help provide soldiers with necessities that run out very quickly: food, medicine, underwear, socks, later even cars and bulletproof vests. Those were especially hard to find because Ukrainian volunteers literally bought out most of the available ones in Europe. My uncle advised my dad to start collecting his own army necessities: a vest, uniform, good shoes, just in case. It was the only one during the full-scale invasion when I had a real, actual screaming argument with my dad, because I asked whether he could get me a vest too. He said if Belarus breaches the border, me and mom have to go to Poland without any questions. I said he is no better soldier than I am in theory, because none of us have any experience, and even though he might be stronger, I have basic medical knowledge that can be useful, and chemical one too, because I helped local territorial defense mix Molotov cocktails and work out how to make them more effective. My father said he will never allow me to enlist, no matter the urgency, because you know what happens to girls at war. Some of the refugees we helped, some young mothers and a teen girl, were raped by Russian soldiers. In occupied regions, rape happens routinely, and unfortunately in volumes that we are not really able to calculate yet. Me and mom said we would not leave my dad behind, so he took us to a nearby range and taught us how to shoot. Now I am one of the incredibly lucky people who can be outside of Ukraine. And even though I love it here in Notre Dame, every day is filled with guilt and worry for the ones who are still in Ukraine. It was kind of easier to volunteer directly and see that my help made an actual difference for the people. But I'm still here, and every time I get a surge of panic when I hear a siren, a fire truck, or the sound of the plane, I am reminded that even though I, unlike many others, can physically get out of war, the war always stays inside of me. Thank you.
Feels like already too much, isn't it? Well, the last one. My name is Christina, and I want to thank you that you are here and Armed Forces of Ukraine that we are here. I'm a 30 years old medical doctor doing a clinical psychology master's in Ukraine and an exchange semester here. I'm the oldest probably, and the war for me started back to 2014. I was born in Zaporizhia. It's a city in south of Ukraine. These days, Russian's army is just across the river, and the grave of my father is in the occupied village. My city is shelled literally every day, and right before this meeting, it got another like 10 bombs into the city. Currently, I live in Lviv and study at Ukrainian Catholic University, which I'm extremely proud of. In 2015, following Maidan, when the war started, I enrolled as a paramedic to Azov regiment and spent almost a year in Mariupol providing medical and psychological support to soldiers. Some of them became my friends. And as you may know, after the defense of Azovstal, most of Mariupol soldiers were in captivity in inhumane conditions, tortured and killed. Luckily, yesterday, 108 of them came back home, but my friends are still there. Here we have Yarina Pesko, who passed intensive training on a zero front line, becoming a paramedic in a hospitaliers unit. You can see their site if you look at the QR codes, and you can donate them if you'd like. Every Ukrainian citizen has to know tactical medicine these days, you know. Talking about the full-scale invasion, I want to say it wasn't a surprise for me. Like, I knew it will come, but I didn't want to believe. Several months before 24th February were the worst in my life. This increasing tension, anxiety, and stress among society. People were not able to tell that we are waiting for the war. So we made a lot of memes like, call me after the invasion, because we didn't want to believe so much. I used medical thinking. If I won't pack emergency backpack, invasion won't happen. It didn't work. On the morning of 24th, I woke up shocked and spent the entire day checking on my close ones who were in different cities and preparing for the apocalypse, like pills for cleaning water, backpack, everything. No one knew what will be. Next day, me and my partner went to the nearest recruitment center. I wanted to enlist as a medical doctor, but we both were rejected. Soon after, I participated in the 10 days training organized by EMDR Ukraine and Mark Walsh, who trains military and civilians across the world about trauma and resilience. And since that day, my life kind of got meaning. It was beginning of March when we made this training, and by the end of March, we already had our own charity foundation called Sane Ukraine, with more than 50 trained volunteers among psychologists, social workers, and students of Ukrainian Catholic University. We began doing 4 hours interactive trainings for volunteers, internally displaced people, and it was followed by a huge project for all public schools where all teachers in Lviv were trained in like how to manage their stress, how to manage their kids' stress. We were teaching them some like coping techniques, which I often do to make it day by day. Also, we're doing trainings for soldiers. As for now, we have 60 trained professionals and trained almost 10,000 people, including 5,000 teachers and 512 soldiers, much more ahead. This is an example of how a group of students can make significant changes. I feel guilty that I'm not fighting, though I'm proud of our project. We are building resilience in Ukraine and taking action towards overcoming this war on a psychological level, which is our fight. People in Ukraine are extremely united, you won't believe. They're helping each other in any possible way. Volunteering became the second part-time job for almost everyone. This unity will definitely help us to overcome all the fear and suffering of this war before and after our victory. And we're here to obviously answer all your questions, though it's not the easiest topic to talk, but it's better to. Also, you can see around the room some QR codes where like VEST, like the biggest foundations that we trust to, you can help as something. Thank you for attention. It was great talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ola, Olenka, Ola, Bohtana, and Christina. So what I heard were many things. And let me just say a little bit about what I heard. And while I do that, you can think about questions you may want to ask or comments you may want to make. I heard a lot about displacement and home. And this question, where is home? Home as a place where you have strong emotional ties with. And the displacement as a situation where you have to find your roots within yourselves because your roots have been taken away from you. Secondly, I heard a lot about emotions, feeling guilty not being there, feeling guilty being here, but also the emotion that you are afraid of, that the public would at some point just get used to it and see the war as yet another one-line item to digest in the morning when you look at the news. I heard the struggle to find a role in these events and the question of what are relevant activities. There was this sentence, in a war, any activity is relevant. It was impressive to hear the new roles that you and your families found in founding NGOs, in providing training. And also, when I come to think that life in normal circumstances is hard. You have children, you have cancer patients, you have the elderly, you have people in wheelchairs in peaceful times and countries, let alone in a war zone. I heard the importance of information sharing and being updated, and this, where the social media help us to remain connected. So that's what you do with your friends back in Ukraine and what you did in Ukraine with those outside of the country. And then I heard this very hopeful voice about the future. So I love this sentence, I study hard. So I'm here in Notre Dame, I study hard because I know my country needs a well-educated person. And I also remind all the young people here in the room that there is this appeal to, well, you are the future of your country. And so this is the future that we have built together. Before I open to the entire audience for any questions or comments, I would like to open this space for our Ukrainian students and friends. There are more Ukrainian students here. If there's anything you want to add, there's more expertise in the room. Anyone? No one is forced, everybody's invited.
There is nothing like I wanted.
Your name.
Okay. I'm Sophia. I'm an undergraduate student, also from Ukrainian Catholic University. There is nothing I wanted to add. I just wanted to say thank you for coming, because it's really important for us to see that you're interested in this topic, and that, like, yeah, that's really important for us. So thank you for coming, and ask whatever you want. We'll try to answer your questions.
Okay, so invite you to the question. Kevin, may I ask, will there be a mic going around, or will we ask questions without the mic? No, that's all right. We can easily do that. So the floor is open for everybody. A question or a comment or a footnote. It can be polite. It should be respectful. It can be brilliant, but it should be honest. Yes, Judy. Maybe you just scream at us. You're so good at that. The question of Russian friends.
Well, I didn't expect this question. I had a partner who is Russian, and since the beginning of war, he started to support his country, which is a big shame and loss. Yeah, unfortunately. I also had friends who lived in Moscow but came back to Ukraine, and now they are fighting for Ukraine. They were Ukrainians who moved to Moscow, but now they came back and fighting for Ukraine against their former friends, unfortunately.
I also have a pretty interesting perspective in that sense. A part of my family moved to Russia. They didn't do that recently. They moved to Smolensk in like the 80s and 90s, and they were actual Ukrainians who nonetheless, in 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea and invaded the eastern part of the country, they stopped talking to us. We tried to communicate with them and try to get their perspective from inside Russia and discuss all of the issues. But for them, their perceived personal safety in Russia was more important than knowing the truth and speaking with us. I found it really hard to understand how living in a Russian society and growing up in a Russian society affects people very deeply and unfortunately extremely negatively, because I have a different experience of one of my pretty far off relatives, but still a person who I know from my childhood, is a woman who's from Russia, but he has lived in Ukraine for 45 years. And still, with the start of the invasion, she was trying to tell me that Ukrainians are just provoking the Russian army and that we should be doing more to try to calm them down instead of fighting back.
Anyone else?
This is also not so much about friends, but about relatives. So my grandparents and their kids, they moved to Russia when my mom was 6. So early 1980s, I would say. And my grandma and my grandpa are still in Russia. And this, here's we're like more scared because we don't know when or whether we will see them again in person, because they cannot move from Russia to Ukraine because they have Russian passports, and they couldn't leave Russia earlier before the war because their son who lived in Russia was his family. So my cousins, who I don't really communicate with now, he was sick, so they had to stay with him, and now they're unable to cross the border and be with my mom, and they're in their late 70s. And also my dad's relatives, they are in Russia. They've been living in Russia their whole life. And when the war started, my dad's godmother sent him a text saying that my dad asked her, like, what is your standpoint? Like, how do you view the situation? And she said that one day we as Russians and Ukrainians will unite against the evil West. And that was their last conversation. So that's pretty much it.
Thank you, Lenka. If I just may add a little footnote, and please think about the next question. Mike is here and we're having a diplomacy class. And today we talked about science diplomacy and the question of what does science diplomacy mean in the situation between Ukraine and Russia? And there are basically two camps. One camp saying have as many ties at least to individuals as possible, because there will be a time after the war and you do want to have some background or infrastructure infrastructure to fall back on when Russia reinvents itself. And the other camp saying you have to sever all the ties, because this is, as I think Bohdana said, not just about a few individuals in Russia. There's a whole society, the whole system, and the whole machinery. So it's really a very tricky question, what to do with people who used to be our friends and partners. Any other footnotes, questions? Yes, please, sir. Mike is coming your way. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you all for speaking today. I have a question, perhaps in a bit of a wider context. As Ukrainians, I'm curious how your experiences in the last year have informed your understanding of other conflicts going on, other geopolitical conflicts going on, both in the region and Eastern Europe. And myself, I'm an Armenian American, and I'm curious if your experiences in the last year have in any way brought you closer to the people of Armenia or Georgia, or in places with other similar conflicts, and what your hopes are for the future going forward, if you think that perhaps your experiences have brought you closer to them, and what your attitudes are towards that.
Thank you. What's your name, sir?
Noi.
Noi. You want to go first? Yes, please.
Thank you for the question. On the right of political science students, I'll try to answer not only as a Ukrainian. Well, I do believe that the war and the invasion which happens to a variety of countries because of Russia, as you mentioned, Georgia, for instance, one of the latest one before Ukraine, it is a common situation which illustrates Russian imperialism. And I do believe that each time Russia invades any country, it was a chance to stop it from the side of international community, since we are all speaking about the democracy and unity and fighting for all of those values. But when the conversation comes to the action, we see what we see. And I do believe that now Ukraine and the war going on gave a huge perspective for the whole world to unite against the evil which threats not only the democracy, but the peace, not only the peace in the question of war, but in the question of nuclear threat. That's why I have a huge hope that the war in Ukraine will be the last one that Russia will be allowed to cause. Since I cannot remember from all my academic readings that the world was united that way. Like, we could say it at least about the 21st or 20th century. Yeah, hope I answered your question.
Thank you, Christina.
World has controversial opinion about Armenia. I've been to Armenia, I've been to Georgia. I have friends in Armenia and Georgia, and take our condolences about war in Armenia started by Azerbaijan in this complicated time, unfair war, and I think Azerbaijan can do this. Like, it's really painful what's happening, and no one can protect your country, unfortunately. But I hope that with the fall of Russian Federation, you'll get better support from other countries. I hope your people stay safer than they are now.
Sure.
I have a more kind of personal perspective of that. Obviously, when you experience something of that volume and that importance in your life, it unexpectedly brings you closer to people with a similar experience, because it's a very unique existence, and you automatically feel closer to people who experience the same thing. And specifically in terms of Armenians and Georgians, since they've also suffered a lot, specifically from Russia, I've noticed how automatically close I feel to the people and to the people of this nationality because of the shared experience. I had a chance to participate in a short-term youth exchange in June, and a Georgian team was there. And Georgians were the first people with which us, the Ukrainian team, were able to really talk with very freely. And it was an unexpectedly and surprisingly beautiful experience, even to talk about the horrors that you've experienced, because you feel that you're not alone in this. And if you are not alone in this, there are people who can help
to unite the rest of the countries. And the more victims speak up, the more victims of Russian aggression speak up, the more chances we get to solve the imperialistic system that exists, unfortunately, right by our side.
Thank you, Bogdana. I promise I will not make a comment to every question, but this is too tempting. Just a second. When we had the summer school in Dubrovnik, our Croatian friends, where you had a war 30 years ago, were emotionally very close to our Ukrainian friends because they could relate in a much deeper way than we could to what's going on right now in Ukraine. Okay, I have two hands up. Yes, sir. One in the front and one in the far back. You know, my number 2 on my list.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for all you have shared with us. I really appreciate and admire deeply your resilience, your braveness, and so on. I don't think you need to feel guilty, really, about leaving your country. Everybody in the world today knows just how hard it is to leave one's country. You're not just displaced, you're dislocated, as it were, and yet you are still one with your country, and so are people of goodwill everywhere. I wanted to ask a bit of an uncomfortable question to you, and maybe to other Ukrainians here. A bit of an uncomfortable question, like I said. So when this war started, there were Africans who were studying in Ukraine, you know, and who, as you know what happened to them, how they were discriminated against when women and children were being evacuated to Poland and so on, and how some of them suffered terribly. Now, it is interesting that the media didn't cover that. It's only just a fragment of the media, at least I watched it here. I learned of it first on social media. I didn't believe it because I have been fully supportive of Ukraine up till the time I heard it. It actually dampened my spirit. And then eventually, when I found that it was not just a social media hype, you know, when a few media outlets began to disseminate it and to ask questions about how these African students were discriminated against, I didn't, it dampened my spirit a bit because I said, wow, this is, I wouldn't want to get into that, but then I want to know what you people think about how some of these Africans studying in Ukraine that were discriminated against, and some of them suffered for weeks actually in the cold then, you know, and found it difficult to get into some of these neighboring countries, especially Poland. So what do you think? What is your perspective on these Africans? Thank you.
Thank you. And I invite all Ukrainians here to help.
Hi, my name is Irena. I decided to take, this issue is close to me because I live by the border. I live really close to International Peace Center that was bombed a couple times. And there was actually a big problem, but the thing is that nobody in Ukraine, nor me, neither my fellow friends, Ukrainians, nor like international people who are internationals or come from different countries, we did not believe the war was going to happen. There was embassies that were running from Keough to Lviv or to other countries, so they were leaving the capital. But nobody believed the war would really happen. And I know they were sending letters to all of the international people to leave the country. They were warned that the war will happen. And so as you can imagine, right now there's like 7 million people outside Ukraine, all Ukrainians in like scattered around Europe. So the mess on the border was huge. I live 25 kilometers away from the border, and the line was going by my flat, by my apartment, 25 kilometers. People, cars, trucks, autobuses, like everything was just standing. And the thing is, they were trying to get women and children first. So leaving the men behind, and international students who were leaving the border were they were allowed to leave because they are not Ukrainians, so they were not like denied the exit point, but they were not the first priority because they were warned before by their embassies, and then it was women and children first. And yes, they organized, there was not only them suffering, everybody, actually there was crazy humanitarian crisis, everybody suffering, not enough food, not enough hygienic products, not enough access to like just, you know, restrooms, and cold, it's winter, and winter in Ukraine is harsh. And then they were leaving, putting up barracks outside the border by Poland because they could not do it in Ukraine. So to get some food, some shelter, they had to be outside the border, and it was packed. It was just crazy for all of them. So I feel very sorry for them, honestly, for them not being able to leave free, like safely, you know, but this was crazy for everybody. And yes, so just a little.
I would also like to say that obviously the general issue was that any foreigners who were in Ukraine at the time are a responsibility of their embassies. Even though this is the case officially, it was obviously a horrible situation. And even though it's very hard to admit, obviously there are racist people in Ukraine, unfortunately, and there are racist people in Poland who received the refugees. And it's horrible to see that such discriminatory practices were like a thing in the border and inside of the country too. There are also obviously Black Ukrainians who were born in Ukraine and bear citizenship who also suffered discrimination simply because of their skin color. And it's very unfortunate, but I think we have to kind of not shy away from it. It is a problem, and it was a problem of the officers on the border who were kind of bringing their own discriminatory beliefs into the work. I hope that after the it's very interesting actually that you say it wasn't on the news here, because it was a pretty big deal in Europe and a lot of people started talking about that at the time. So I really hope that after that the situation was fixed and they found the responsible workers and the border police who engage in that, unfortunately. But it is what it is. Unfortunately, there are racist people in Ukraine, and that's something that affected the situation too. Obviously, in the situation of war, all emotions kind of become heightened, and unfortunately, this also includes hateful and discriminatory emotions towards other people. So yeah, I'm really, really sad that this existed, and I was devastated seeing that. It's obviously very unfortunate, and even though we can say that like women and children were prioritized, this was obviously the case, but there's also a bigger question of how and why men are not allowed to leave the country. It's also a problem because of the martial law. Ukrainian men are not allowed to leave the country if they are older than 18. And there's a whole conversation there. Obviously, because of the volumes of the crisis that was happening on the border, a lot of it went not unnoticed, but rather undocumented by the officials. But I do hope that something will be done about that. And right now there are much more organized ways of leaving the country, and the borders are much, much safer for all people. So I hope that the situation kind of dissolved and something will be done in the future with the racism that exists in Ukrainian police.
Thank you, Bogdana. You're fine. I have Sir with the beard, if I may say, Kevin.
Hi, my name is Adrian. So I have a question just for the panel on Ukrainians in general, because this is like the third war that Russia has launched. Do you guys see if Russia loses, like collapse and Russia ceases to exist as a form, as a country itself as it is now? Do you guys see in like collapse?
We need collective intelligence for this question. So anyone in the room? I'm looking at Taras as well. So anyone who wants to say something?
Maybe anybody who anybody from the row. I mean, because we speak a lot and
Yeah, division of labor, division of epistemic labor, as we say. It's a big question. It seems that it is very difficult to imagine that there will be a new beginning in Russia with the people actually in power right now. And there are some conclusions that follow from that. And one conclusion is, well, who are those people who support the people who are in power right now? And then I'm from Austria, and when Nazism collapsed, I mean, we had this kind of new beginning where you had some kind of denazification, some kind. Of course, 90% of the judges remained in office and the system kind of remained in office. Austria was a big country and collapsed in 1918. So that was a good thing for Austria. I'm not sure whether there's anybody in the room who can speak, eloquently about the Russian situation and prospects, because what we read, and when you read Putin's speech, or actually his essay from July 21, he just moans the fact that the Soviet empire collapsed. So he went through this pain of loss, so to speak, and then that must have been quite deep for many Russians. And so the idea of Russian Federation collapsing after that is a very interesting idea, which I do not know how to answer that without speculating.
I see it from perspective because I'm from Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is part of the US. We're entirely different. So it's just maybe because you guys were part of together country at that point, maybe you guys can see like a different perspective of how, okay, now they've tried to regain back some of their territory, but they're failing, and you see like more breaking up more and more and more, so there's no real Russia left.
Maybe it's a question for psychologists.
I'm not in the entire time. As a psychologist, I want to tell you that at the time of the beginning of the war, I had a Polish student. She lives on the border with Ukraine nearby. And you can't imagine fear in her eyes when Kyiv was compared to Warsaw in 1939. And she said, we are afraid that it really will be Warsaw now. So when you're saying that Russia is trying to get her territories back, you should also consider Poland, part of Germany, Baltic countries, and now part of Finland, whatever. And it won't happen. And yeah, as not a social politician, I do see it collapses. I don't know why. I don't know when, but it will.
I'm kind of sorry for speaking too much, but I have a lot of thoughts. So the problem is that Russian imperialism, which existed for centuries, wasn't really recognized publicly until the start of the war with Ukraine, because it's one of the first international conflicts of such scale that was televised and that existed on the internet so freely. And we have an abundance to information now that helps kind of the world community realize that Russia is an imperialistic, colonialistic country. Russia is not, when we are talking about collapsing of Russia, I'm not even sure if something will be left, because I don't know if Russia is as a thing existed. Ukraine existed centuries before Russia, and when Russia started existing as a proto-state, a lot of centuries back, it literally from the start of its existence became invading other countries and trying to conquer territories. So it's something that literally exists for centuries. It's nothing new, and it didn't start at the Soviet Union. I personally, as a Ukrainian, grew up with the story of how my great-grandfather was imprisoned by Russians for nationalism in the Soviet Union and then shot in the prison. My other grandfather was hung because of his nationalism during the World War II. My grandfather was imprisoned for a time in the Soviet Union as a suspected nationalist. One of his cousins was actually buried alive in a forest by Russian army because he was suspected to be a nationalist. It's something that we grew up in, but imperialism is something that the Russian people grew up with. I really think that the reform and a new start for Russia as a country is only possible if the whole world doubles down after the victory of Ukraine. Because if we just let them go, they will kind of get stuck in a feedback loop of their own internal biases, and the society will just become more isolated to ensure that no Russians are against the policy of the government. So what we do have to do is really
think about what's going to happen after Ukrainian victory in terms of economics, because obviously the Russian resources are a big kind of thing that stops the world from fully embracing support of Ukraine and other countries that have suffered from Russia in the decades prior. And we have to rethink how we kind of try to eliminate the Russian population from the responsibility of the war, because ultimately all Russians are responsible. Obviously, not all of them are responsible in the same way or in the same scale of responsibility, but they grew up in the system that allowed what's happening now to happen. So I don't think that Russia can have a truly clean and fresh start unless, no matter how crude it sounds, all of the people that grew up in the current system die. And only the children that will live in post-war, post-Ukrainian victory Russia will maybe be able to rethink the politics of the country and reshape the way of the country into the future.
Thank you, Bogdana. In Armenian voice, talk.
Thank you. Sorry. My next question is about internal division within Ukraine. I had the distinct privilege of living in Keough for about a year and traveling to Western Ukraine while I was there. And for the year that I did live in Keough, I was in 2021. I spoke Russian there practically on a day-to-day basis. And I suspect if I was to go back and do that now, I'd be met with varying levels of animosity. And from what I gather, all of you, with the exception of Olha, have family and roots in Western Ukraine. And I'm sure to all of you, it's common knowledge that I think an estimated 40% of Ukrainians speak Russian as their first language, particularly in the East. And if hopefully Ukraine continues on this current trajectory, is able to in fact liberate Donetsk and Luhansk and the entire Donbass, as well as Crimea. Crimea particularly, which is 97% ethnic Russians, not even Russian speaking anymore, but actual ethnic Russians. I'm curious what you think the strategy will be going forward, because it'll be critical to rebuilding, to build a sense of national identity, especially after 8 years of being torn apart like this. But all I can sense currently between Ukrainians of varying backgrounds, whether they speak Ukrainian or Russian, is this distinct tension, sometimes even animosity. So I'm wondering, in a post-Ukrainian victory world where Ukraine is made whole again as it was pre-2014, what you think the correct policy is going forward to unite the country after that?
Thank you. Can I just interject something? So the next question is maybe a little more on the micro level. So this is not an academic panel where we have political scientists who discuss the future of Ukraine. It's a level where we want to focus on experiences and first-person perspectives. But of course, you have a lot to say. So there was a question about post-war Ukraine and the Russian language presence, internal division. Yes.
Thank you for this question. Actually, the language question is Ukraine is difficult. We understand it, but we also understand that Russia is our neighbor. And of course, people who live in the east of Ukraine, they are influenced by it. And we can't change it. Unfortunately, we can change our neighbor. So first of all, I think that we do not need to blame these people that you speak Russian, please, and push them to change. But because of war, because of full-scale invasion, a lot of Ukrainians had their conscience, and they decided to study Ukrainian and speak it. They understood this importance without any strategies. It's war happened, and we understand that the language is the part of our national identity. So many Ukrainians started to learn Ukrainian and practiced it with other Ukrainians. About strategy, yeah, I'm a political scientist, so of course I thought about it, and we I know that our Ministry of Education and Culture started to get rid of some Russian poets, and because when I was at school, I remember that we learned some like poems in Ukrainian, and also it was Russian version. So now they started like to get rid of this Russian culture and have Ukraine don't have it. So, and I think that in some schools we had Russian language, and it is very important because like it's your first years when you grew up, and when you study Russian, yeah, it's not good. So probably one of the point in this strategy is that do not learn Russian language in school. But yeah, it is difficult because I'm sure that some people will say that, oh, that's like language of my mother, and it's language of our feelings, even that we grow up and we experience like everything in that language. So it will be difficult. But I think that if we like will have like small steps, step by step, and yeah, so the point is that not to get rid like in one day, no Russian language, but like to try it, to do it gradually. But it's, yeah, that's a difficult question.
I know that Noah, it's my political science colleague, and I'll be really short since I'm really proud and I'm happy that you're aware of Ukrainian culture, things, and the history. Thank you for it. In a nutshell, Russian was my first language, but Ukrainian is my mother tongue, and we should not forget about it since I'm coming from the most eastern part of Ukraine. But for now, I'm gathering my bachelor degree in the most western. So you see the difference. But it was speaking about the culture, and the thing were to rebuild Ukrainian spirit in countries, even in cities which will be deoccupied. I could say we're doing it. We was doing it during the peaceful times, as you mentioned, eastern part of Ukraine, as well as some of the south parts of Ukraine, are also Russian speakers. Most of them do not know, or I probably think did not know Ukrainian so well before the war started. But personally, from our university, Ukrainian Catholic University, we organized a variety of projects. One of them, I participated in it in January. It was the Christmas, and we organized a project, launching project in Odessa. It's south part of Ukraine. And the idea was to rebuild the Ukrainian traditions in those parts of the country where it is not so famous and populated among the people. And it is hard, but yes, people were trying to learn by heart the traditional Ukrainian songs and traditional like Ukrainian events were held in during the Christmas evening and etc. But I could say that even on this student level, even before the war started, we had a great success in it. That's why I do believe with the help of the government and with the unity of Ukrainians and those people who are standing with us, we could do it not only in a border of a country, but even for those Ukrainians who are living abroad and who will be living abroad and maybe gain a citizenship of other countries. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ola. Let me suggest that we take two questions together, the two ladies almost next to each other. Yes, please.
Hi guys, I don't think I really need the mic, but also
you can hear your voice, but we cannot hear your voice. It's better.
Okay. You guys are doing a great job answering all the questions. So like, thank you so much for like answering it. I wouldn't be able to. So, kind of a different end. What is your favorite thing so far about being at Notre Dame, and do you like birth or subject?
That's good. Think about it carefully. Think about it carefully. And then maybe we take the second question. I think you want to say something. And use the mic, Justin.
Okay, sure. So personally, for me, whenever I've heard about Ukraine, it's always been like from the lens of the Western media. And it's the first time I'm hearing from panelists who actually, live there. So thank you for sharing your perspectives. But on that note, I was wondering, a lot of times when the Western media or the global media even portrays situations about a war in another country, it's from a third person point of view, which sometimes fabricates the facts of what actually happens during war in that particular country. So coming from Ukraine and, living through that experience, is there anything that you've noticed in the media that were portrayed, but is not really the situation or the reality of what's happening there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we have the Notre Dame dining hall question and we have the media question. Who wants to talk about the Notre Dame question?
No, maybe I would rather answer the second question. And yeah, and after that, of course, about dining hall. It's so about the media. Now we have so many, like with Ola, we have so many articles about also the situation in Ukraine that were written not in Ukraine, like abroad, here in the US and other countries. So a lot of things are not like totally wrong, but sometimes some details. For example, I remember that I had article that that people from Ukraine were not allowed to cross the border without their passport, because I know that not all people have it, but people had opportunity to cross the border and go to other countries, not for all, but like Poland and some like that are close to us. So in this article, it was like written that only to Moldova you can move, and if you don't have passport, you want to flee, you can't do it, and you need to stay in Ukraine, and even if your city is bombed. So yeah, it's not like wrong, but yeah, and a lot of facts like. So I just think that you need to know very trustworthy resources, and because like now in 21st century we have a lot of like not really true information, fake news, and you just need to use your critical thinking and know the good resources if you want to know not only about Ukraine, like every like geopolitical situation in different country. Yeah, of course, it's like sometimes we see that, and it's like normal like for this century. So yeah, you just need to have these resources that you trust. And about dining hall, I live close to South, so I don't have a choice. It's very close, so I go to it.
Thank you.
I'll answer. I'll cover both, but really in a nutshell. First of all, North Dining Hall, since I'm from Louis. Second of all, about the media, everything been said by Ola, I supported for 100%. However, I was interviewed by Associated Press. You may guys reading them like all the morning, I guess. And the point is that those media groups were really good in illustrating the war in Ukraine. They were going to the hot spots at the very, very beginning, and all of the video they sent, they illustrated it 100%. It is not a drama thing or something. It is the real thing which are going on in Ukraine. However, since I've been interviewed by them, and I gave my comments on the United Nations, and I said like it needed to be like reformed. And those guys said that I hate the United Nations and all those things. That's why, yes, they are not the proper details, but in the question of the video, for the 100%, I'm almost sure it is true. But if it comes for the interview, you may come like hold in mind that sometimes they are doing not the right thing. They are presenting the station how they want, but know how it usually is. That's why the best thing I just go for Instagram, found someone from the location, I mean Ukraine, if you do want to know something about it, or any other country when you really do want to know the ongoing geopolitical situation, because like I'm doing it each time something happens in different countries, because I do trust some medias, but also I do trust the personal experience the person could say directly to me. Yeah, that's maybe an advice for you if you're interested in such things. Yeah, hope to be helpful.
Thank you.
Yes, very. Thank you. I will try my best. So I think the easiest thing if you want to keep up with the true news is to find Ukrainian media who write in English. There are some of them, and if you're like specifically interested, you can come up to them and we will be able to provide them, because obviously they have a closer experience. And I think South Dining Hall was built specifically to be stressful for people. So I hate the building, so North Dining Hall all the way.
I'm sorry, I don't have anything polite about South Dining Hall, but But I won't comment on the second question, only on the first one. When me and my roommate Salomia came on the plane, we were approached by a stranger talking to us in Ukrainian. We were like, "Are you Polish?" He was, "No, I am American, just speaking perfect Ukrainian." And what I really love here is the amount of support you all guys in the university itself is providing for us. It's hard to be away, but with all this, it's much easier. And partly answering to the previous question, soon Ukrainians will be speaking English and Ukrainian mainly as two main languages. So we'll keep being bilingual. And yeah, Notre Dame is great. Just
thank you, Christina. So our plane is slowly descending. We have less than 10 minutes. We take Marina, and then, maybe a last question from you in the front.
Hello, thank you. And thank you for speaking. I know it's very vulnerable to be up there, so your words are very powerful. And my question is kind of going off of not the media. I'm science, not poli-science, so I'm not going that way. But Ukrainian is a very poetic and very beautiful language. And so when you share your experiences, do you feel that you can translate and articulate your experience as well? What has your experience been in communicating in English, specifically about your experience?
A question from a wonderful Ukrainian American colleague. Who wants to answer the question about the beautiful Ukrainian language? Anyone here in the first row? Oh.
Well, Ukrainian is poetic, but I think that when it comes especially to panels like this, it's probably even easier to do it in English, because then you sort of turn on your scientific brain in a sense and try to rationalize and intellectualize everything you're saying and try to make it make sense rather than rumble in Ukrainian. And obviously, like, the question of language is interesting, because there is sometimes it's hard to express in English what you're trying to say in Ukrainian, because words are different and they have different meanings. But from everything that I heard today, I think that everyone did a pretty good job trying to translating their feelings and emotions and everything that, or the experiences that they considered the most important for them into English. But again, if you have any more specific and personal questions, you can always just come up to us and ask us in person without all this official atmosphere. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So my last question would be, like, as you guys are here at Notre Dame for the semester, do you think your focus is on showing how Ukraine is now and like focusing on like advocating for the war and supporting Ukraine? Or do you guys find yourself focusing more on just like telling what your life was like in Ukraine, like prior to February, and kind of showing people just like, this is what Ukraine is, and like kind of the, like, you're fighting for it to become more back to how it was, if that makes sense? Like,
thank you.
Do you want to portray more like the war life now to encourage people, or are you trying to explain like, this is what Ukraine is like and what we're fighting for?
Thank you. Let us take this last question. What do you see as your main task here in Notre Dame? As the last question, where I would ask each panelist if you would be willing to respond to that. We start from the left and move all the way up to Christina.
Interesting question. Like, what we are going to do, of course. I think that what you mentioned, like, both is important, and educate people on what is going in Ukraine now and what it was before. So we just need, like, to talk and raise your awareness. And if you're interested in this, we can tell you this. But of course, we are here for studying, for meeting people and Ukraine, and speaking about Ukraine like everywhere, and organize such like panels and more events. Yeah, that's very important. And of course, we are here for that.
Yeah, I'll ask both questions because nobody asked Julia's question about our experience here in Notre Dame, and so far it was lovely. Thank you for having us and for telling us that this is our home, because as you heard, that's a sensitive topic. And regarding what we're trying to do here and how to represent Ukraine. As far as I'm concerned, we are the first exchange students from Ukraine here, specifically exchange. So I know that it's probably hard for you to approach us and ask us questions, specifically because we're coming from the background that has, well, there's war going on. So this panel was sort of way for us to show this, our experience specifically in war, but we're obviously much more than just this and just these experiences, because we're 20, 21 years old and the war had been happening for 8 months. So before that, we have experience in our country, which has really rich culture. And we, especially me as a cultural studies student, I really want to make sure that when I leave in 3 months, Notre Dame community and especially Americans here do know about Ukraine, not only the fact that there's war going on and that we are fighting for what always been ours, which is our independence, but also the fact that this country and we as Ukrainians trace back really far away in history, before common era, and there's so much stuff that we can cover and talk about. And also Ukrainian culture is not only about our embroidered shorts, wyshivanki, or something like that, or borscht. There's much more. There is much more. So yeah. Thank you.
In a nutshell, both. In not a nutshell, but short. I do believe all of us have a special mission here, not to forget about, not make you forget about the war going on. At the same time, to probably, of course, if you're interested in educate you more about Ukraine, but back to normal times and back to those normal times waiting for us after our victory. That's why I hope that with Ukrainian society, particularly with Marina, we organize some cultural events for you guys to know more about the culture, about the Ukrainian spirit, not only from the sad and guilty news we are seeing on our Fetish Day, but also from all of those variety of activities our culture, our nation, and we as peoples of our country have to share. I hope we'll organize something this semester for you to know about Ukraine, not only the sad line in the news.
Thank you so much, Ola.
So, as you probably have noticed in this panel, at least I hope so, personal stories hit much deeper. So we really recognize that we are the ones who can actually raise quality awareness of the situation, but we would also, as what was said, like to share culture. And actually me, Olenka, and Sofia are trying to get organized an event about Ukrainian mythology in like upcoming to Halloween. So if it's successful, keep your eyes out on that.
I'm excited to hear this. Can I be invited? Well, something strikes me in this back to normal. This is like we look ahead, and a lot of people recognize that they'll never be the same, and we just have to accept it. World will never be the same after these 215 days. So we're like looking ahead, remembering what is important, our heritage and everything else. But yeah, it won't be just back to normal, unfortunately. And yeah, thank you for having this panel. I feel like I should say something. I don't have to say anything.
Sophia, you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to this question, like it's sometimes difficult for us to not focus only on war, because it's like a very big part of our life now. So it's sometimes very difficult to talk about other things related to Ukraine, but we try, and we like are ready every time, like if you are interested to share everything connected with Ukraine, with our cities, with our traditions, to learn Ukrainian if you want. And yeah, we are very glad to be here and to have this opportunity to share everything with you. And we will wait for you in Ukraine when the war ends and after our victory. So
thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you to you also for your questions and this lovely atmosphere that all of you have helped to create. I also want to thank the Klau Institute. Thank you, Kevin, and Notre Dame International, great presence and your Senior Fellows program. And ever since February 24th, I end all events that we do for Ukraine or with Ukraine with the statement of our president on February 24th, when he wrote, "The former oppressors of Ukraine are now known by another name and are waging war under a different flag. But the trauma is no less today than in the past in this nation that has suffered far too much. Now more than ever, our friends in Ukraine are in need of healing and hope. We at Notre Dame stand in solidarity with all peace-loving people worldwide in demanding an end to this invasion of a sovereign nation. This unprovoked war is an international abomination and must stop now. Until it does, may God keep safe all of the innocent men, women, and children who are currently in harm's way. The prayers of the Notre Dame family are with them. Thank you."